I met this guy on the beach, and he had his wife with him. And I'll get misty on this one too. And he had a big boat, we had a little boat, and we're on the beach talking as you do. And what do you do, and what do you do, and that type of thing. And he was looking at us, and we didn't have kids yet. And he said, "See that woman over there? Yep, yeah, that's my second wife. And see that boat, big boat? Yeah, that's impressive." He goes, "I trade it all to get my family back."
Welcome to another great episode of Dre and Smiley, The Inner Circle.
Dre, I don't think I ever told you about the time I took an Alaska cruise from Vancouver all the way on it was an intercoastal cruise. I went to Skagway, Ketchikan, and Glacier Bay. It was a breathtaking cruise, and I'm so excited because today is our first Alaskan on the call, and it's amazing. So let me read Paul's bio. Paul,
Okay.
aka One Happy Landlord, is a 30-year real estate investor and business owner in Anchorage, Alaska. He currently owns and manages 60 units along with a bar and a coffee shop. Married with 2 daughters, he and his wife have balanced business with extensive travel, at one point taking off for 10 years to sail the Pacific and live in New Zealand. This is our second New Zealander. Wow, that is super cool. They returned to the States in 2012 and picked up where they left off business-wise. His wife, Becky, recently published her book, Selling Ohana, which details their journey from real estate to raising kids at sea and back again from a mother's perspective. Paul holds an MBA and taught geography at the University of Alaska, Anchorage, and is also a 100-ton U.S. captain and New Zealand launch master. With a heart to help young investors succeed, he started sharing landlording tips aimed at small investors to help them not only prosper and have a life, but also be a positive force in their respective communities. Wow, Paul, that's amazing. What is, if you could define for our audience, what is a New Zealand launch master?
A New Zealand launch master is basically just a captain. So when I was down there, and this kind of dovetails into the whole real estate thing, the idea is you make a job. And I was down there, we were kind of semi-retired, and I wanted to do something, and there were harbor ferries driving around Auckland Harbor. And I said, I'd like to drive one of those. So I went in, made a phone call, put it in motion, took the course, got the license because I already had the 100-ton and other, I was qualified for it. And I got a job driving a boat part-time. And they actually weren't hiring. And I said to them, hey, can I work part-time? I'll work for free. And I worked for a month for free. And I got a job. Being a bus driver.
There you go.
Right. So to put this in context, to bring it back to the current realities, which is going on in Baltimore with that boat that ran into was that a 100-ton? Was that a bigger boat than the one you used to captain, or was it smaller? Like what size is a 100-ton boat? It's like
that's about 100 foot, 130 foot. These are your motor yachts, your large ferries.
Oh, okay.
That size. That guy was unlimited, and that was a very unfortunate. That was a terrible situation.
Yeah. Okay.
Hard to believe.
Right. So
small boats.
You had like yachts. So we have a lot of those here in Tampa and Miami.
Oh,
so you're a captain on some of those. Okay, that puts it in perspective. Now, the thing that's interesting is you talked about real estate and boating. How do you see the two? Or how did you get in? Were you a captain first, then you got into real estate? Or you got into real estate and the captain, or was it simultaneous?
I grew up sailing on the Hudson River in New York. My father was an armchair sailor who had dreams of sailing the world. And he never did those dreams, but he passed them on to his son. So all through, worked through high school, went in the Coast Guard at 17. At 14, I saw 2 Coast Guard boats come out of Newport, Rhode Island. I'm like, what's that? I go, I want to do that. So I went and signed up when I was 14 years old. You could do that. Went in at 17. Got out at 21, got the captain's license because I had the sea time. Worked as a yacht broker, worked as this, worked as that. This serial entrepreneur trying to figure out, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. We had less than nothing. I just couldn't figure it out. And at one point, I just said, I met a lady and she said, Paul, there's 3 things people need. They need food, clothing, and housing. Pick one. She was a real estate investor. And I just looked at her and I go, well, you look pretty cool. I'll do that. And so I said, it was really that simple. I said to myself, housing, I could do real estate, and then just did a deep dive into that and bought a little duplex. And My only thing my parents ever gave me was $7,500 for the down payment on that little duplex and VA loan. And, it's not rocket science. That's kind of what I want to get across to, my viewers and young investors is that there's no magic bullet.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so a lot of my content is around, it's really work. It takes a lot of dedication. It's a tough business. And I watch the gurus say how easy it is and just kind of want to put a little damper, a little governor on the throttle so these kids can succeed. Not that answered your question.
Yeah, Paul, let me follow up to that. So one thing that I noticed is with your social media posts, you really engage your audience, right? You have bite-sized content and knowledge that you share. You do an incredible job making it concise, clear, and again, engaging. When I later learned that you were a college professor, I thought that's where he
Just like
gets
to
that
talk.
skill of, yeah, exactly. Where he gets that skill where he's able to talk versus ramble. And the little nuggets you share are just incredible in terms of like, one thing you mentioned that I saw on social media is the importance of building a relationship with your tenant, right? Because, they'll treat you as well as you treat them, generally.
Yeah.
Generally. And you shared an example of where someone was I think you bought a small, I don't know how many units it was, where you had one good tenant and a few bad tenants. And you started going in there and just brightening up the place. You started changing things, make it more of a, better place to live, that type of thing. Kind of just creating good gestures, I guess you could call them. And then slowly you came around to asking them to transition on, offering things like cash for keys, et cetera, et cetera. So that resonates, that makes sense to me in terms of, doing that type of thing. My question for you is this. Once you started with the duplex, was your goal to then grow to 150 units? I believe you're at 60 now. What was your
120, I
goal
think, yeah.
after you were at 120? Okay. So what was your goal with that first duplex? Was it, okay, I'm start here and then my goal is to...
Great question. I never had these huge ambitions, and I'm more system oriented than goal oriented. So I saw how the system worked. So my first goal was to learn how the system worked, and my goal when I went to the realtors was basically I want to live for free. It was that simple. And I went to 12 realtors, and they all laughed in my face. And this gets back to persistence for young landlords because they're going to go to the first realtor. The first realtor is going to look at them and say, "No, you can't do it. Keep going to realtors." The 13th realtor, Tim Wingersey, goes, "You can do that." And we found a little duplex on the wrong side of A1A in Hobe Sound, Florida, just north of Jupiter. And it was beat up. And he goes, "You can get it." I bought it, and at that point, I got a roommate, Howard, and Howard and I were there, but I still wasn't living for free. And it had this large walk-in closet pantry off the kitchen. It was big, so I turned that into a little room. And I rented that room out to a gal, and I lived for free for 2 years. And we all got along great. Had a neighbor next door, Pete. He did his thing, and that was it. And at that point in time, I was sat there one night in bed, and I was had a little tear in my eye, and I go, "I can't live like this anymore. Something's got to change." And at that moment, I decided I'm going to go finish my education. So I sold the duplex. I made enough money off of that to go to Florida State. Finished up at Florida State. I've been going to night school forever. Like, do people ever graduate with an associate's degree? I didn't know. Somebody actually graduated once. I'm like, "You actually graduate from this place? Palm Beach Junior College." And I went on to Florida State, and I said I wanted to get the vaguest, broadest liberal arts degree conceivably possible. And they had a thing called the International Affairs Program. I started that, which you could take courses in 6 different colleges. And then I loved geography. So I jumped into geography, and I got a double major, in geography, maps and stuff. And then I got done with that, and all my buddies had MBAs. So I said, that's a good idea. So I went on to get an MBA up at Maine Maritime Academy. And I can tell you a few things about MBAs, which I would encourage young investors not to go that route. I'd give you an MBA in about 12 seconds. And that was kind of the transition. And after I finished grad school, I was basically 26 years old, unemployable as an MBA because you're too old at that point in time. Big companies, I interviewed with Sealand, Mitsui OSK, a bunch of larger companies. I wasn't that bright. I was bright enough. They're just like, they want you when you're 22, 23. They put you in their training programs. They run you through the whole thing. And my buddy at that point in time, he said he had gone to Alaska in '89. I drove up with him. And Alaska was in a very unique situation back then, real estate wise. It was in the toilet. And he said, I got done. He goes, come on up to Alaska. And my wife will hate this. He goes, I got a job for you, a place for you to live, and a girl for you. I took the job, lived in the place. I still got the girl.
Wow. Friends. We need friends like that.
We just had our 28th anniversary yesterday. Actually,
Congratulations.
we did not go out boating because of you guys.
Oh, sorry. Worth your while. We'll try to keep this fun and exciting. You mentioned the 12-second MBA. You mentioned, the MBA is not worth pursuing for a real estate investor. Tell me more about that.
Well, both of our daughters are entrepreneurial minded. They're both killing it. And I took one of them to meet with a very successful woman whose name you'd recognize. And we sat down to lunch and said, what are you going to do, your future, so on and so forth. And she basically said, listen, if you're going to go the entrepreneur route, you don't need to do the college thing. And today, God, there's so much stuff. I mean, just what you guys are doing here, sharing this kind of knowledge, and I've saw some of your other podcasts. That's MBA stuff going on right there. Mm. She said, if you're going to become a bank, a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, yes, I got no problem with that. That's great. But the MBA, at the end of the day, it's all about making decisions, and there's no right answers. So once you understand that, there's no right answer. So, people can get paralysis of analysis and sit over a deal for hours. Listen, you just sit down, you do the math. It's not rocket science. You look at the numbers, you look at your skill sets, your tolerance for risk, and you say, can I do this or not? My 2 cents is basically, if you want an MBA, and I told my daughter this, they opened up a studio down in Arizona, and they go, should we rent this space and do this big remodel and all this stuff? I go, you know what? You'll learn more in that 6 months of doing that remodel and opening that space than you will learn in 2 years in an MBA program. And it will cost you more than it would cost me. But that difference between what I would pay and what you would pay is called tuition. And, they did it 6 months. It took 9 months. At the end, I asked her and her husband, what'd you learn? And he went through everything you guys know. I could have dealt with contractors better. I could have sourced this better. I didn't read the contract, that kind of stuff. That's it. So, you need to have a dose of common sense, basic math skills. I mean, addition, subtraction, work with percentages, some basic algebra. I mean, basic. That's it. So sitting through finance class, which actually finance was good. Sitting through accounting or all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Not worth. And like I said, on YouTube, if you have the motivation and inclination, you can learn what you need to learn to do the deals you want to do. And it's not just real estate. Everything I'm talking about is not so much DIY and that kind of stuff. It's philosophy of how you deal with situations that come at you in business, your attitude, how you deal with your customers. The tenants are, they get forgotten. And that's your customer. And when you get into that relationship, that mindset, everything kind of comes together.
So I know your approach is to manage, I believe, all of your own tenants yourself. You manage all your properties yourself.
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay. So that leads me to this question. For those that, there are some that believe, the best way is to manage it yourself because you have a good sense of what's going on. You have your finger on the pulse, etc. Others believe, well, if you really want to passively approach this, have a project management company, and you free up your time. Your time, you can't actually buy more time by having a PM, a property management company. What is your thought on which approach is the best? Managing it yourself,
it's neither. Company? It's hybrid, and it goes in phases. So phase one, phase one, you're getting from 1 unit to say 20, 25, 30 units. I got up to about actually 80 by myself with no problem. But when you get to about 20 units, you need to be managing them yourself. You need to be in there. I've got a guy I'm working with right now, young kid and his fiance just bought their first fourplex. I'm driving by, checking on them every other day, dropping off tools that I've got because I'm not using them. And I tell him, listen, you need to get in here, change that door, put that peephole in, redo that kitchen, put that floor in, do that paint, do all this stuff and learn how these buildings work. These buildings, like boats, are systems. So they've got roofs, boilers, windows, lights. You get the idea. Plumbing, heaters, air conditioners in Florida. You need to learn how all this stuff works. Now, when you get about 20 to 30 units, and I'm talking about being a full-time landlord, not having a job in the office. So this kid, he got the taste. I mean, he's going to buy another 7-plex here shortly. He's a school bus driver. He'll be able to stop doing that, work on his buildings. His wife, fiance works. And, so so this is a full time, this is what you're doing. You're dealing with your tenants, you learn all the bits and pieces, and then you grow. Now you're going to get to a point like I did where after the first 10 years, because we did go off for 10 years, I bought a large 40 unit apartment complex. And what I learned, what I should have done in the beginning was buy large complexes. Now everyone's going to be like, well, how do you get the money to do all this? You start with the little ones and you work up and you pay your bills, you live below your means, all basic Dave Ramsey stuff, except for debt.
Mhm.
I take on a lot of debt. But I actually had a conversation, not really a conversation, but I wrote to Dave about that and said, let's talk about debt. I get it, but you take on debt and you're young, you can take risk, and that's what you do. As time goes by, your cash flow goes up, you pay your buildings down. And if you're lucky, you ride up an appreciation wave in the real estate. And at one point in 2001, Bush had his capital gains cuts on long-term capital gains. And I said to my wife, now's the time. And I got off a little tangent here, but earlier on, we had been sailing. We'd go sailing for 2 or 3 months. My buddy would sail for 2 or 3 months. We owned a boat together, and we'd watch each other's properties while the other one was gone. That was kind of our model. I'll get back to property management in a second. And I met, so we did that, and I met this guy on the beach, and he had his wife with him. And I'll get misty on this one too. And he had a big boat, we had a little boat, and we're on the beach talking as you do, and what do you do, and what do you do, and that type of thing. And he was looking at us, and we didn't have kids yet, and he said, see that woman over there? Yep, that was my second wife. And see that boat, big boat? Yeah, that's impressive. He goes, I traded all to get my family back.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
And he said, when I was young, I was full go, make all the money. He owned a large cable network up in the Northeast. And he goes, my kids are estranged. My wife is gone. If you guys can do it, spend the time with your family, your kids when they're young.
Yeah.
So in 2001, 2002, at 120 units, I was going full tilt boogie. You can imagine. We had 2 kids at that point in time. And we decided we're going to sell half of them. So we sold 60, paid off the other 60, pretty much, and took off. And we raised the kids.
Nice.
that's it.
Nice.
So I had to digress there for a second. So this gets back to the bigger thing. It's not all about money. Everyone gets so spun up around the axle about making. There's a whole balance of the whole thing. And it's why you're making it. And if it's to drive the McLaren and have the boat and all that, at the end, it's going to leave you feeling the same way. My buddies and I behave the same way at 60 that we did at 30. We're still all looking for deals. We're doing the same stuff. So the money doesn't change that. It makes everything a little easier. So back to property management. When I got the 40-plex, it came with a property manager, Dave. And he lived on site and the whole bit. And I quickly learned that I could manage the managers. Now, what I should have done earlier was I should have bought larger complexes when I got to the point where I could, because they're easier. It's easier to manage a 40-unit apartment complex than it is to manage a 4-unit apartment complex. You got more people. Systems are standardized. When we had all the units, I could not get a maintenance man to get his head around driving to every unit every day, every building, walking through the laundry room, make sure things are clean, empty the garbage, say hello to the tenant, fix the one little thing. They just couldn't get their head around, 30 or 40 buildings spread all over the city. But in a 40-unit apartment complex, the guy could get up in the morning, have his cup of coffee, walk up and down the hallways, And so I learned that kind of property management model worked. What doesn't work, in my opinion, is hiring an outside property management company. If you're an active full-time landlord, they charge, you pay the 4 or 5% for their fee. But on top of that, they're going to under rent your units because they want to get them filled, not work too hard. Now, there's a time to under rent units. We'll talk about that later. And then they're going to hire out all the work. So for me to go in and I use a peephole because I just did a situation with a peephole recently, but tenant wanted a peephole. Well, in our situation, we just go get a drill a hole, put a peephole in. In the property management situation, the tenant says, I want a peephole. They fill out a work order. You can do the rest of the math.
Right.
It generally gets forgotten, or 10, 15 days later, they get a peephole. And the whole time your tenant's sitting there, your customer going, all they want is a peephole. And you're sitting there going, in your office doing all your big fancy stuff with your computers, you forgot about the peephole. Well, you forgot about the tenant. And I've had tenants actually move out of our buildings, which, we're low to middle income. The buildings aren't perfect. The carpet doesn't match this, and the kitchen cabinets might have a different door or something stupid going on inside of them. But they've moved out to these really nice brand new buildings, and like clockwork, a year later, Paul, you got anything for rent? And that's what you want. A good tenant stays for a long period of time. And so if you can work with them, and they're also always, they're going to get in trouble at some point in time. When they get in trouble, I got the one going on right now, you have an opportunity to help. And in my experience, I don't know the number, but rarely you get totally taken advantage of. Watch my words. But more times than not, you get them through it, and they will stay with you forever. And it's just good landlording. And that's part of what I want to pass on to the young investors. Be a good landlord. It's not, again, not rocket science.
I got up to 9 properties, and I got a family member who has 50 units, and he's talking about scaling. And just listening to you speak in the phases, it's like I just remember watching him going through the phase of like, I think I'll be happy with 10. And then he started to, like, karma, he met people who had 40 and 50. Now he's like, I think I'm happy with 40, 50. Then he meets these guys who have 600 units. And it's like, it keeps going up and up. Like there's no ceiling. Yeah. So every time he hits his goal, he sees up. He's at a new bottom of a new high. So it's just crazy. But I want to tie something in because you mentioned you grew up on the Hudson in New York. You went to school in Florida. You lived in New Zealand. You live in Alaska, and you are into geography. So with your 120 units, are they all around the world, or do you look globally when you're thinking about property, or are you just looking East Coast, West Coast?
You're going to like this. You're going to like this. You look right where you are. My philosophy is put all your eggs in one basket and watch your basket really close. So in our situation, I looked for, at the time it was an accident. Property in Alaska back in the 90s they were giving it away. I mean, we were in a real bad situation. The oil crash had happened in the late 80s. The town had moved out, basically. So there were a lot of properties available. And there was one bad neighborhood that no one would invest in. So where do you go? You go to the bad neighborhood where no one will invest in, because that's where the opportunities are. And for everybody, for the landlord, because you can buy these distressed properties at a fair price. And for the tenant, because you got young new landlords coming in fixing these things up. And the neighborhood rises. And the neighborhood did rise. It's a good neighborhood now. And the other thing is when you buy buildings, particularly if you're a full-time landlord, if you buy buildings and they're in one little area, you can get in your car in the morning, your truck, you can drive around, take care of everything, and it just works. The out-of-state investors, and I've got guys all the time. You want to go in on this deal here in Texas, and this deal in Arizona, and this deal in Idaho, whatever it is. I go, I can't touch them. You got to think bigger. No, I don't. I've got enough. My wife and I have enough. And that's another thing that people don't think about. What's enough? More isn't necessarily better. It could be worse because you could ruin a relationship over just chasing that and not chasing time. Time is what you're really buying. So to answer your question, the out-of-state guys that buy, and I've got a couple of people on TikTok that I'm friends with that do that. I go, I don't know how you do it, because when you're out of town, who goes over there when that sink is dripping? Well, I call my contractor. You don't make a lot of money in real estate. It's really hard. The margins on it, the deal. The margins are not that great. And one hot water heater, I can change out for a couple $100. Heck, I buy used water heaters on Facebook Marketplace. Everyone's going to scream about that. But people are remodeling their houses. They go in, the water heater's 2 years old. They put in an on-demand hot water heater, and they put it on Facebook Marketplace. They basically want you to take it away. I buy them. I just swap mine out. My labor. You charge that to a contractor, and it's a $2,000 bill. You're done for the year to recoup that cost. That's MBA stuff, just do the math. It ain't rocket science. So, I'm more inclined to encourage people that are young, starting out, don't have a whole lot of money to jump in there and work, and then to understand that it's gonna be frustrating. And the frustration is part of the thing. So when you see the frustration, welcome it, because the frustration is a chance to learn, a chance to build your skills, buy more tools. We all like buying tools. Just take care of your tenants and grow. Oh, and the other thing, cool. You mentioned karma, and it's not when you go out into the world and you start when you put an idea out, like going to see Tim Wingursky, I want to live for free in a little duplex. When you put that idea out, all of a sudden stuff starts coming back into you. And then the next thing happens. And this applies to any business. We own a bar and a coffee shop as well, which I never expected to fall into. They're a part of real estate deals. And, and when I go, I don't know how to do that, then all of a sudden you start asking questions. The next thing you know, people love to talk about themselves. And you get people talking like you're doing right now with me.
Yeah.
You can learn a lot. I mean, I encourage my daughters. I said she's interested in graphic design, graphic arts, Studio Ghibli. I go right to the head of the company, write them a paper letter and mail it, and do that to a bunch of different, and they will write back to you. And then, sorry, you get the idea.
No, these words of wisdom.
Preach to the choir.
Thank you for sharing that. So with the real estate and you're a professor, when do you do that? Are you a professor of geography, or your passion is geography?
No, I did that for 5 years. I had just gotten up to Alaska in '92. I had just started, buying my first fourplex with a partner. I bought a 12plex, and the universities hire adjunct professors. They're basically part-time. They don't have to pay benefits. I stumbled over to the business school thinking that'd be kind of cool. I went to the business school and I said, hey, I've got an MBA. Can I teach business? And they said, where'd you get your MBA? And I said, Maine Maritime Academy. When they got done laughing, I stood up and I walked over to the geography department. And I said, hey, I got a geography. I got all of them. Pick which one you want. I got a geography degree. You got any? And the guy, Ron, his last name, Ron, probably shouldn't say it. Ron said, yeah, you could teach geography. I got a class for you right now, physical geography, rocks for jocks. And he goes, you start on Monday. Here's the book. Stay one chapter ahead. Okay. And I just did that part-time. So I taught like 1 or 2 classes a semester. They were at night for 3 hours. You have 50 to 100 students. And I actually, and this ties back into business. Now, I was still growing and doing the real estate during the day. So it wasn't a full-time gig. But it was interesting. And I had all the students, their project was to sit down, pick a place on the earth that they wanted to go visit, put together a notebook, and I wanted to know everything. Where they're going, what flights they're going to take, where they're going to stay, what they're going to eat, what they're going to see, history, climate, the whole bit. And these kids put together these notebooks. I can't tell you how many of those students, and I also said to them, it's a paradox. Don't say, when I have the money, I'll go on the trip. Say, I'm going to go on the trip, and then the money will come.
That's right.
And exactly. It just works. And I can't tell you how many kids went on those trips. That was a lot of fun. But that was just a part-time gig. Primarily, I was just fixing toilets.
That is so cool, because I was sitting here thinking when you were speaking, and we've had a captain of a cruise ship, or no, a chef of a cruise ship was on our show, and then they do the boats from San Fran down to New York or down to Los Angeles, back and forth, and she's the captain of this boat, not the captain, the chef of this boat with like 12 guys on there or 21 people, and she just makes all the food. Yeah. We had another real estate couple, and they bought a building, but it had a laundromat in it, and they didn't know anything about the laundromat, and they did exactly what you had said. And now that laundromat is like the community center. Everyone comes in, they cleaned it up and changed the whole venue. When that person told you, the real estate lady said you got to eat, shelter, or food, and what was it? Clothing.
Yeah.
If you were to talk to her now, years later, what would you tell her about that journey, or what would you say? You didn't tell me this, or I'm so glad you emphasized that, or what would be the next sentence after that?
I can remember her face, and she had this white dress on, and she was driving a white Mercedes, and she had all the jewelry, and she had a cigarette. That's what she said. She goes, Paul, people need 3 things. If I had to get, I'd probably just say thank you. I'd probably just say thank you. That was one small of many little. The other thing I didn't tie into, and my buddy and I talk about this a lot. There's a certain wiring in people, and it's not good or bad. It's just different. The entrepreneurial lifestyle, you can see the signs early. Like I started mowing lawns at 10. You get, and then just always hustling. And if you got that in you, the other thing is I did a tremendous amount of sales training when I was in my early 20s, and I was a yacht broker, not a very good one. But back then we had the cassette tapes. You remember those? Zig Ziglar and all that. And
Sandler.
Yeah, all of them. And I just immersed myself in those SALE, how to sell their solutions. You work towards solutions. You help folks even with tenants, it's always a sale. Just last night I had a lady who not to details, but at the end of the day, move or don't move. Can I stay? Well, if she stays, okay, well, let's talk about what that looks like. And we're negotiating. And it really helps, I think, for a young person, if you have, and on YouTube, there's tons of it, the time to just immerse yourself in its core fundamental Dale Carnegie type stuff. Nothing has changed. Nothing.
Yeah.
People behave the same, understanding what you're dealing with when you're in the situation, knowing, for me, my number one rule is a 24-hour. When you're in conflict, when you're in an aggressive situation, just stop. Can we talk about this in 24 hours? And the temperature comes down. The next day, it's usually an apology because something else is going on in their life. And this is part of success in real estate. You're not managing toilets and electrical and all that kind of stuff. You're managing people. And in residential real estate, and if I had a do-over, I might go commercial because I've learned a lot about residential. but in residential real estate, you're dealing with a lot of human beings that have a lot of diverse problems and challenges. And you're, as a landlord, and landlords get a lot of flack, but you're a major authority figure in these people's lives. And so you have the ability to speak into them. And especially when they get in bad situations, a lot of people will call me. What do I do about this? What do I do about that? And dovetailing that into sales, it's not just sales, negotiation, people skills, understanding, and I haven't really talked about much on the channel, but it's like, how do you make landlording missional? And well, this is something, go ahead.
No, this is fascinating, but I could just anticipate the comments. They're going to be like, Kevin, why didn't you ask about the 10 years on the boat? When you just, if you could just say that, not too much of the details, but what was you sold 60 of your properties, you paid off the other 60. And how did that look like just being on the boat year 2, year 3? Is you ever hit like a rogue wave is like, man, we should be back on land? Or how is that and you're one, you said you had daughters, so you're the only guy, unless you had a male dog, on the boat with 3 women at sea, Gilligan's Island, without Professor Howe. You were Professor Howe.
I got fired from homeschooling. So we started. It's a great question. Everybody asks the storm question. I'll get to that. Maybe we'll tie it into real estate. Watch this. But, my wife's born and raised in Alaska. She's a tough woman. She can take up. She can do anything, we throw at her, and she's open-minded. And when we decided this, what was life on the boat? We bought the thing. It was a deal. We fixed it up, and we took off for a year. Our youngest was 1, our oldest was 3, going on 4. So I feel bad because our younger daughter doesn't really remember the trip, but you can buy the book on Amazon. And it's sold out again, but just be patient. Life is like life at home. You're living in a 300 square foot space with 4 adults. It's hard to explain if you haven't done it. That you're constantly moving, so you're goal oriented. I like moving on a boat, not staying still. So you're moving, you're seeing new places, you're always exploring. And we lived in Mexico for close to a year. And the kids went to school in Mexico because we lived on the boat. And we went down to Belize, Guatemala, down to Colombia, off to, you get the idea. So it was always an adventure. On the long passages, our longest was 18 days. Surprisingly, time, after 2 or 3 days, I recommend this for landlords just to get out into whatever nature you can get out into, or business people. After 2 or 3 days, time changes. And it just, days move into days. Things go by fast. You have routines. And I actually like being on the ocean. I just crossed the Atlantic 2 years ago. It took 15 days. And it's just my phone ran out of, Succession on day 2. I'm watching that series, and I had to actually read books, and I read 4 books. I forgot what this is like. It's just a different vibe. And the only time we were sailing from Tonga down to New Zealand, and that's a 1,000-mile passage. And normally in a catamaran that we had, I can stay in front of the storms. In this particular situation, the storm ran over us, and we had about 60-foot seas for about 4 hours with about 30 to 40 knots of wind. It was honking, and the boat would be going down these waves, and you're watching the 2 hulls get to the bottom, and all I could think was, elevator up, elevator up, and then the boat would pitch and it'd go up the other side, down, and my wife and the kids were on the floor playing. And my wife's like, "Is it okay?" And I'm like, "It's a no problem."
Yeah, everything's fine. Everything's fine.
Those 4 hours flew by. I knew the boat. I knew my skills. I'm a responsible sailor, and those 4 hours passed. And I want to put a pin on this, because in real estate, everyone talks about the worst tenant, the worst building, the biggest disaster. And in sailing, they always ask, what's the worst storm, the worst thing? The truth is 98 to 99% of it is nothing. Actually, not enough wind is the usual problem. Mm-hmm. Thank God for diesel. So, but in real estate, when you get into those really super bad situations or on the boat, those super bad ones, know that that's a small thing. You're going to get through it, but then you've got smooth sailing. Hopefully. So just to tie that into just philosophically, keeping that in mind, we tend to focus on the negative, and most of life's pretty positive if you can see it.
Yeah. So two questions for you real quick before we get into the final four. One is, so you were away on the boat for about 10 years. Is that right?
Well, we did 3 years. We did 3 years actively cruising on the boat. 3 years, okay. We arrived in New Zealand in 2005. We were playing a circumnavigation. Now, at that point in time, a lot of folks don't know, every year there's a whole group of boats leave at a certain window because of the weather. So we ended up in New Zealand with about 40 other families that all had kids. Oh, wow. And we all looked around, and some went back to England or the States, continued on their circumnavigation, and some of us decided to stay. And the girls were, at that point, they were 4 and 7, and we decided to put them in school. New Zealand, until you have to pay taxes, is a beautiful country. And we just sat there, and we saw the lifestyle, and we could afford it, and that was a blessing, and so let's just stay. So we went and got 2-year visa, then we had a 4-year tax holiday, then we my wife started a little bike jersey business, and I puddled around driving boats, and we chartered our boat for a while, and learned a lot about that. And time went by, but then the girls got to an age where we had friends that said, listen, if you stay here where your oldest daughter starts high school, you're going to stay here forever. At that point, we said, it's time to go back to the U.S.
So that leads me to
go ahead.
Question coming back to the U.S. So what was it like getting reintegrated, right? So one thing that's great is that you had the opportunity to have these incredible experiences that you can't read about in a book. Your kids could never have otherwise learned what it's like to face the challenges they faced on the sea, what it's like to make new friends in the area they've never been to before, New Zealand, etc. What was it like for the family coming back and getting reintegrated into the U.S. in terms of getting back into business, your kids getting reacclimated into the community? What was that like?
For me, it was fairly simple because I just stepped right back into the same truck and started going back to the same building. So for me, it was easy. For my wife, it was pretty straightforward. She's born and raised here. Her mother and father were here. She stepped right back in. Okay. For the kids, there was I think it was hardest on our youngest because she was starting middle school. And that's and she's used to New Zealand and running around the fields in your bare feet. And, kids are pretty free range down there. In the States, after even one, she did 6th grade fine. And then 7th grade started and she just couldn't melt. She was a free thinker. So we took her out in homeschool. It was toughest on her. Our oldest, she the first year or two, she was coming out of her shell, but then she came out of her shell, and she became prom queen, but cheerleader, the whole bit. She went crazy. So to answer your question, it was tough for the first probably 2 years for the kids, the hardest.
Okay.
But, my wife is very, very intuitive with them and better than I am and helping them get through it. So
great.
There you go.
Great. And then the last, this is the last two for sure. They'll do the final four. You clearly have a passion and skill for real estate. You also have a clear interest in helping others. That interest to help others, where does that come from?
Exactly. Sat there. I took my son-in-law driving around one day. He goes, what do you do? So I drove him around. You see that building? That's what I bought it. See that building? That building? We're driving around, looking at the building. After like an hour, he goes, stop. So let me get this straight. You've been doing the same thing over and over again for 30 years. And I thought about going, dang, I've been doing the same thing over and over again for 30 years. And I go, I'm getting to the retirement age. I've learned that you never retire. I've had friends, we all kind of retired and we all came back to doing work later. And I think personally, I want to work my whole life. So what can I do next? And I thought, there's so many young kids out there. My daughter was, Dad, why don't you make a TikTok? So if you see the very first TikTok, it's very pathetic. That's where I started. and I did that. And I thought to myself, I could never see my father in life. There's no video. There's very little of anything. And I go, I'd like to have my kids, when I'm gone, to be able to see their dad in this mode, not this mode. So I said, so that's fun. I started doing it, and then obviously get feedback real quick. It resonated for some reason. Young people are writing to me. I answer every DM. I answer all the questions. I don't charge for this. I don't really have a monetization model. Short of, I have a little store on my website, 1happylandlord, with all my landlord parts. Another plug, but it wasn't the intention. The intention was to really help young landlords hear from a seasoned landlord what they're going to experience. And hopefully, my buddies and I, we learned the hard way. And so if I could help them get through that, that's number one. Number two, we want to go cruising again. We're looking for our next boat. I need something to do for 4 hours a day. And you can only play so much golf, but you can learn a skill like what you guys have learned here. I learned what Riverside was today. I was Googling you. Pretty cool. And you can learn a new skill and you can do something for those couple hours a day. That's legacy. You can leave something behind and have something to do into your later years. My body doesn't work the way it used to work. I can't lift like I used to lift, and I'm a little rusty.
Okay.
So
right.
So the motivation to get into it was started with family, transitioned into the response I got back from the universe, and then then just helping young kids get started. I say kids, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, love that. I want to hear about the book, but real quick, one of the reasons Smiley and I enjoy doing this is for the very same reason. Do you want to touch on that, Smiley?
Please.
Yeah, this has been. I like what you said about leaving a legacy. A lot of the younger people, but it seems like we're around the same age. Remember when Superman would go up to Antarctica and he would pull up those little crystals and he talked to his family from the past? That's what I like in the YouTube experience with. Because on my YouTube channel, I'm talking to my granddaughter's kids. Because that's the only way you become immortal. Because now you could go through 2-3 generations and they could pull up Grandpa Burger on the YouTube or the TikTok and they could get their wisdom. So it's just like a way of transcending legacy and time through, because Google at $2 trillion, what's the odds of them not being here when we have our great grandkids? Very slim, possible, but not likely. So that's where I love this social media aspect, because now everyone gets to leave their own little crystal for their superhero that's down in their lineage. So
for me, I just want my kids. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
No, just the impact. As I'm scrolling down through your feed, I'm like, I see. Oh, I'm interested in that. I got the. It's powerful. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. So for me, I just want my great grandkids to, when their parents tell them how funny I was, to be able to have something to look back on and say, oh yeah, he was a funny guy. Okay, the book. Tell me about the book for those listening and watching. Tell me about Sailing Ohana. Tell me about that book and where they can get it.
Can you hold on one quick sec?
Sure. No problem.
Should have been better prepared.
No problem.
Real brief. So this is my wife's book, Sailing Ohana, Mother's Dream, A Family's Journey. You can get it on Amazon. If you just Google Sailing Ohana book, it'll pop up. It'll probably be out of stock. It goes in and out because we're learning a lot about how that works. She basically wrote this, for the kids. Same idea as what you guys are doing. There's just a little memoir. They were so young, and it's not a book about sailing per se. It's about a book about making decisions, what a family does, how life changes in ways you didn't expect. Even if you end up right back where you started, you're not the same person as when you started. So it's a quick read. The stories are short. For the people that are into real estate, it gives a little window into how we actually managed to do it, which we've covered here. Yeah, and I'm really proud of her. She worked for 4 years on it. Speaking of skill sets, you learn a whole new skill set on what it takes to write a book, edit a book, publish a book, get a book to market. And even people who are listening who are not necessarily into real estate, but in business, same principles. Ask questions, get started, make mistakes. I'm sure your guys' first couple podcasts are a lot different than this podcast.
Definitely.
What do you mean? We started with perfect podcast. I don't know what we're talking about, Paul.
I don't understand
any mistakes ever.
I don't understand. I got a friend just like you guys. We've been together since high school. He lives up here.
Yeah.
We've been together forever.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing in Nashville and Tampa? I ask you a question. What's the quick backstory? Why do you like this guy?
Smiley. You want to tell that story?
So during the pandemic, everyone was virtual. The world stopped. I'm a sales guy, so I've been in sales forever. I'm 36 years in sales, and
I like that.
I do software sales. And one of my clients up there in Alaska is Trident Seafood, so we deal with a lot of Trident, and I sell software to them. But basically, what happened was I had a push-up group, and it was just like two of us on the push-up group. And then each friend would tell a friend and tell a friend. And then eventually, one of my friends who knew Andre said, I'm getting on this push-up group. And we would have it it was only 100 push-ups. But sometimes it would take us 90 minutes to do 100 push-ups because it was like dude therapy. We were just talking about dude stuff. It's like being at the gym or playing basketball, but you couldn't do it. Well, my friend, he made it very exclusive. So he wouldn't let Andre in. And I was like,
you tell me about it. You tell me about it. I'm like, dude, let me in. Like, let me get. I'm sure I have to ask. We'll have to see. I'm like, dude, what do I have to do? Let me in.
The most we had was 15, and I think I knew none of those guys. There was like 3 friends removed when we had like 15 people on my push-up Zoom call. But out of there, my wife had a party, and I invited guys from my push-up to the party, and Andre came. And I talk all the time. If someone sits next to me on the plane, they're getting a monologue or a dialogue because you're not getting silence if you're in my row. So that's a salesman, yeah. So I just talk. So he walked up to me at the party. He's like, "Hey, I was thinking about doing this podcast. You want to do it?" I said, "Yes." And he's like, "What?" You said yes. I was like, "Why not?"
Yeah.
So
that's the first time we met face to face. Was that 2001?
2001 at my wife's party, 50th.
Yeah.
Goes by fast, doesn't it?
Goes by fast. Yeah.
So for this Final Four, you've been everywhere, which is amazing. If you had, and you mentioned Dave Ramsey, you quoted Warren Buffett a little bit with, don't put all your eggs in one place and guard the basket and all that stuff. If you had 24 hours to spend with anyone alive or... That's a new Riverside feature. If you had 24 hours to spend with anyone alive or dead, who and why?
Well, I had 2 for that, and one of them I'd only want to spend maybe 5 minutes in his brain if I could. That'd be Elon Musk.
Okay.
I could probably only handle 5 minutes.
Overload.
The next, probably most of your viewers don't know, would be Scott Adams, the Dilbert creator. I listen to him every day. Just the way that brain fires, and some of his books, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Bigly. I mean, they're just life changing. Reframe Your Brain, life changing, and to watch. His focus is on persuasion, and to watch how he can just put together some topics that I look at. I never saw it that way. How did I not see that? And that's just spending 24 hours with him would be very, very interesting.
Okay. Awesome. What's the best compliment that you've ever received?
I thought a lot about that one. My wife and I were talking about it last night. I really didn't have a good one to come up with. Now, hers was, I've complimented you on your skills. I'm really proud of your skills. And that meant a lot. And another buddy said, I want to remind you how cool you are because I think you forget. I said, what? He goes, yeah, you don't give yourself enough credit. I go, well, I appreciate that, buddy. And I haven't really thought about that.
Yeah.
So those are probably 2 of them. I'm not really compliment driven, so I don't seek them out.
Sure.
Okay. Well, here's one. It's a little different, but what is something that never fails to make you laugh? That's side splitting, that you just roll in tears because it's so funny to you.
Well, Instagram cat videos, but a good stand-up comedian, Matt Rife, even Seinfeld back in the day. There were so many.
Yeah.
A really good comedian. That's it. And I'll sit for hours in the car driving up and down to our buildings listening to stand-up. So there you go.
Okay.
Awesome.
What's something that you wish that you were better at?
Organizing people, ironically. I'm not really. I'm kind of a hands-on kind of guy, which has kind of limited my growth. I didn't really go to scale above where I went because I like to be involved in the projects. So I still, I'm wearing my old beat up Carhartts right now, and I'll still go out and do some work today, and I just like doing that. So my buddy is really good at organizing. 4 or 5 guys come in, labor trades and doing that kind of thing. Personally, I just like to lay low, be quiet, and not get a whole big team going. Now, that being said, at the bar, we've got 7 employees. The coffee shop, we have 6 employees. But again, I only manage, not even manage, I kind of partner up with the 2 main. And my model is to give equity to them over time. And so that's kind of, my model. So I'm good at that. I'm good at the little circle, and I'm not particularly good at getting other folks to go do the work for me. I just like doing the dang work.
I'm the same way.
Well, before we close, Paul, this has been most fascinating, but has there been any questions that we didn't ask you that you wish we would have asked you?
The only one would be about the businesses. And I would say I tripped into business later in life. And if I was doing it over again, people always ask what you would do different. I would say, I'd build my base in real estate. I would get to a monthly income level that I could live my life, pay my bills, and do my thing. But then I would look to start businesses, small businesses. And the reason is in real estate, it's a monotonous career. You're selling the same product to the same tenant for the same price on the same day every month. You can't raise your rents or much because you're constricted by the market. So it's a very static business, and it can get boring. And if you maintain your buildings, it's even more boring because you're not getting the emergencies and maintenance calls and stuff. But when you start a little business, and you can do that when you've got 20 or 30 units, and, now a bar is a big one, a coffee shop, a laundromat, any of those kinds of things. All of a sudden, you got a whole new set of challenges and things to learn, and the sky's the limit on your revenue.
Right.
And you can employ people, and then, like I said, I like to deal with managers, and then you can hire more people. It's just fun. So I would have said, if I had a do-over, I would have bought bigger buildings sooner, and I would have looked for business opportunities sooner. Because you learn the business skills in real estate, but you learn them slowly and on a manageable scale, so you're not overwhelmed. So when you get to the business side, and everything's flooding at you like a fire hose, you've got enough of a base foundation to say, okay, I can handle this, I can handle this, I can handle this, I can handle that. That's what we're doing.
Well, Paul, man, we are so excited to have you on this podcast. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate this more than you know. You guys were the first to reach out. This is the first thing like this I've ever done. I'm actually a very private, kind of introverted person. So even this morning, I'm walking around pacing, smoking a cigar, drinking Diet Cokes. Who are these? But you put the opportunity out there, and in that, that I'm going to say it takes a lot of guts to do that from the beginning and what you're doing now, because you're walking into something cold. And on the other side, you put something out, you created something. And I appreciate the opportunity to be part of it.
Appreciate that, man. Thanks again for being on.